Open Your Door, Please by David Edsall. The book is narrated here for your enjoyment. I am presenting Chapter 4 in this segment. At the beginning of each week, I will present one additional chapter. There are a total of 10 chapters. Of course, if you would like, you can always order the printed book from any of these booksellers. Open Your Door, Please examines the ways in which God presents His goodwill to us. God provides us with His love and with the tools to succeed. As author David Edsall notes, we cannot use these tools if we are not open to them. We cannot let God in if we do not open the door to Him. Open Your Door, Please explores the ways in which God has guided the author and presented him with opportunities and tools throughout his life. He willingly treats his own life and personal history as a case study, examining the choices we can make and the differences that can be had if we will allow God to point us in the direction of His choosing. Chapter 4, The Real Me. This chapter is a brief outline of my life as it was actually lived. Everything here is true. It is presented in conjunction with the fictitious Chapter 3, so you can make a comparison. Chapter 3 followed my life as it might have been without the divine interventions I will talk about in this chapter. It was Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock. Present was my grandmother and grandfather, as well as my mother and father. Oh yes, the doctor was there to help me make my grand appearance. "It's a boy," the doctor said. My father smiled. My parents were proud of me, as you might expect, but they did not see how pleased God was to see His creation come alive and take its first breath. He has so many expectations for the future from this little bundle of joy. After all, He had programmed into me special talents and desires that can potentially become reality. Of course, there are no guarantees. I do have a will of my own. My family have been Christians for as far back as anyone can remember. Living at this time was grandparents and great-grandparents on both sides. After my birth, the cards and letters came in from everyone congratulating my parents and offering prayers for me. In a few months, my mother arranged for my baptism with their church. Now, not all Christian churches baptize infants, but ours did. The reason is that some Christian groups do not believe in sacraments, and others define sacraments differently. The Catholic Church has several sacraments, and we only have two: Holy Baptism and Communion. If you believe that you must have already accepted Christ as your Savior before you are baptized, then you would not baptize an infant. Baptism is simply an outward expression of your faith. If you believe baptism is a little like magic, as I do, then you should be baptized as soon as possible. As a sacrament, what is really happening is that you, a born-again Christian, desires to have God plant a seed of faith within you. It's not necessary for you to be old enough to know what is going on. This seed gives the recipient an advantage to help them ultimately make the choice to accept Christ as their Savior. My early years were fine. I was loved and taught the ways of God and how we depend on Him to help us with our lives. My grandparents and my parents and I all lived in the same house until I was about 4 years old. My grandparents owned 4 houses in the neighborhood. 3 they rented were rentals to low-income families. My father was a paper hanger, and my mother worked in a factory that made gloves. My grandfather worked in a factory that made pianos. For the first few years of my life, we all lived together because, well, we could not afford to live apart. It took all their paychecks, plus rent from the 3 rentals, just to make ends meet. Eventually, my grandparents were able to move into one of their rental houses. I was about 7 years old when I paid my grandmother a visit at her home next door. She was sitting in her easy chair in the living room when I came in. "Oh, Davy, I'm so glad you came in. I have something I want to say to you," my grandmother said. I looked at her with a suspicious eye. Sometimes she would go on about how God was going to be calling her any day now. When my grandmother finally passed away, I was 21 years old. "What is it, Grandma?" I asked. "Sit down, Davy, just for a little bit." I sit down. "Davy, I want you to always be a good boy, even after I'm gone. But I want to tell you something about yourself. You see, when you were born, your body was, well, like an empty bottle, yet to be filled with wisdom and things of this world. But your bottle, in other words, you, were not born perfectly clean. Your bottle was a bit dirty. Everyone that is born with a dirty bottle. I know you have been baptized, and I know that you go to church and Sunday school regularly, and that is good. But you are doing this because you have been taught by your parents and me. Davy, that isn't good enough. You see, just trying to be good is not good enough. If we want to go to heaven and be with God after we leave this earth, we must ask Him to let us do that. He needs to come into us and help us do good. We won't always do good. Sometimes we will make mistakes and do things that God doesn't like, but it won't make any difference if God has come into us. He will keep us safe and bring us to heaven to be with Him after we leave this earth. I just sat and looked at her. I had never heard her talk like this before. I sensed that what she was saying must be awfully important. I continued to listen. Davy, you are old enough to accept Christ as your Savior. Very soon I want you to ask God to come into your life and wash your bottle clean. I want you to do it as soon as possible, but not until you are ready. When you finally do it, I hope you will come here and tell me. Okay, Grandma, I said. I left her house with her words ringing in my ears. Just what all did she mean? In Sunday school, I remember that they said we could not be good enough to go to heaven on our own. In order to do that, we would have had to live our lives completely sin-free, never having sinned, even once. But I know that I've done things God didn't want me to do. I didn't know any better. My parents had to teach me not to do some things, but I had already done them, so it was too late for me to earn my way into heaven. As I walked toward my house, it came to me. Grandma was trying to tell me that I was old enough to ask Jesus to come into my life, so I could accept His free gift of salvation. What came as a revelation just then was that Jesus didn't just come into my life automatically, not even if I went to church and Sunday school regularly. I had to ask. When I reached my house, I immediately went to my bedroom and got down on my knees beside my bed. I remember it as though it was yesterday. Jesus, I want you to come into my life and help me do what you want me to do. Please, Jesus, wash my bottle clean. There are no words to adequately describe what happened to me at that instant. I immediately got goosebumps, I think all over my body. I felt something like waves of electricity surging through my body, from my head to my feet and back again. It just about scared me to death. I jumped up and ran out of the house and back to my grandmother. "What is it, Davy?" she asked. "What has happened? You look so strange." "I don't know, Grandma. I did what you told me. I went home and I prayed that God would wash my bottle clean. As soon as I said the words, something happened to me. I felt so strange. I thought I was being shocked with electricity. It scared me so much I ran over here." My grandmother's face changed into the biggest smile I'd ever seen, and she began to laugh out loud. "Oh, thank you, God." Davy. "Oh, thank you, God. Oh, my beloved grandson. Oh, you have just been filled with the Holy Spirit, and that Spirit will be with you the rest of your life. Oh, thank you, God. Oh, Davy, getting your bottle washed clean was simply a bit of a shock to your body, not to mention the entering of the Spirit." Oftentimes, I would ask my parents to tell me what to do when I had a problem or a decision to make. Sometimes they would just tell me to ask God. Sometimes I would say that answers from God usually take too long. I want an answer now. Sometimes they would say out loud to me to hear, "Oh God, please forgive my impatient son." By the time I'd reached the ripe old age of 12, my friends and I were practicing to see how many could use the most cuss words in a single sentence. I wasn't too bad at it, except for one thing. I could not bring myself to take the Lord's name in vain. Oh, I could use the F word or a damn or hell word, okay, but if a slip of the tongue caught me saying a goddamn, I immediately had to excuse myself and find a quiet spot to apologize to God and ask Him forgiveness. During my 13th and 14th year, I was a 9th grader. In our school system, high school didn't start until the 10th grade. During this year, we studied all sorts of vocations. They wanted us to begin thinking what we wanted to do to make a living after we graduated school. We even took an aptitude test, which showed that I knew the names of tools but didn't know what to do with them. The test suggested that I might want to become a farmer. I was pretty sure that wasn't going to happen. I could think of nothing that I wanted to do. College was probably out of the question. There was not much money, and I was very much a C or average student. When I asked my parents what to do, well, you might know what answer I got. "God, I don't know what you have in mind for me to do when I get out of school. Please show me what it is. I need the answer soon so I can make decisions about high school courses to take next year. Thank you in advance. In Jesus' name I pray." Well, the heavens opened up and God descended down on me and sat down beside me and explained everything to me very clearly. No, I'm sorry, but it doesn't work that way. In fact, God never did exactly tell me what He wanted me to do. I was left to pick out courses at random. I had to pick one major and 3 minor subjects. So I picked English as my major and biology and world history as 2 of my minors. A classmate friend asked me what my class choices were. I told him and mentioned I hadn't yet picked my final minor. He suggested the shop course of printing. He said he was taking printing as a minor, and if I did, we could be together. Might be fun. I said okay. I didn't even know what the course was about. For all I knew, it could have been a class teaching me better penmanship. What a surprise on the first day of class when I entered the classroom to see printing presses and type cases and a big paper cutter. This may have been a mistake. It looks very complicated and not an easy course at all. When I came out of the printing class on the first day, I was somewhat discouraged. A neighborhood friend of mine saw me and asked me if I was coming out of the printing class, and I said I was. He asked why I took that class. I told him I didn't know, but I was already sorry. Well, then, why don't you get a transfer into the welding class? A lot of our friends are in that class. It'll be fun, he said. I agreed and immediately headed for the Dean of Boys' office. There was a line, so I queued up. While I was standing in line, the first bell rang, indicating that I only had 5 minutes to get to my next class, or I would need a hall pass and an excused tardy pass. Just as my turn came to see the dean, he raised up in his seat and asked me to wait a minute. He would be right back. Standing there, I thought about the hassle of getting the hall pass and the excused tardy pass. So I left the office and rushed to my English class just as the last bell rang. The next day in printing class, I decided it might not be so bad. I never got a transfer into welding. It was probably late in my 15th year that I befriended a girl that lived in my grandparents' rental. She was quite plain, but a bit outspoken. I think she was desperate for a friend. She said to me one day, "Do you want to see my breasts?" Well, she didn't actually use the word breasts, but I'm trying to keep it clean. Of course, I said, yes. Ooh, wee. They are perky little things. We actually never dated, but we would come together quite often in the neighborhood. I had asked her a few times if I could see them again. She was always accommodating. One day I asked her if I could touch one, and she said yes. And while I was touching her, she asked, "Do you want to do it?" I knew what "do it" meant. I looked at her and took my hand back. Then I said, "Yes, I would." "Where could we do it?" she replied. I thought a second, then said, "On Friday nights, my family always go out. My house is empty after 7 o'clock. Why don't you come this Friday about 7:30? I couldn't wait. So many of my friends and classmates were claiming that they had done it with a girl before. I felt quite left out, but here was my chance to see what it was like. After my parents left on Friday night, I primped myself to the nth degree. I even shaved. Not that I needed to. a splash of cologne, and all I had to do was wait until she got there. This was going to be great. As I stood in my room waiting on her knock on the door, I felt a gnawing inside me. What was it? Was God telling me not to do this? But I really needed this. Everyone was doing it. It would be all right. But the strange feeling wouldn't go away. The feeling was threatening to ruin my evening. Come on, God, give me a break. I noticed a Bible on the bedside table. Okay, I said. I am going to open up that Bible and, with my eyes shut, put my fingers somewhere on a page. If you don't want me to do this, here is your chance to let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to have a great time with that girl. Where was my finger pointing? Leviticus. Whoever reads Leviticus? It looks like chapter 18, verse 17. Thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of a woman and her daughter. Neither shalt thou take her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter to uncover her nakedness. You gotta be kidding me. What are the chances my finger would land on that passage by accident? I thought a second. This can't be a coincidence. This has to be a clear message from God. Just then, a knock on the door. It was her. I opened the door and invited her in. I still wasn't sure I would refrain from having sex with her. I looked at her a second, and then I knew I could not do this. I told her I was sorry, but she became furious. She jerked open her blouse and exposed her breasts. I turned my head and ordered her out. I told her I never wanted to see her again. She called me a chicken. She said she would tell everybody that I was queer. With that, she turned and darted out of the front door, buttoning up her blouse as she went. Now, it hardly ever happened that my parents would come home early, but this day they did. They pulled up in front of my house just in time to see the girl dart out the front door, buttoning up her blouse. She cut across the yard and headed down the street. My mother wasted no time getting into the house. What have you done? She barked at me. Nothing, I answered. Huh, doesn't look that way to me, she replied as she turned on her heels and stomped off. My father was left standing there looking at me. He said nothing. Look, I admit that I meant to be with her tonight. I think God wouldn't let me. I attempted to explain. What do you mean? My father questioned. I continued. Well, before she arrived, I had a feeling about what I was going to do. I wanted God to leave me alone, so I said I'd give him one chance to stop me. Opened the Bible, and the first verse I came to could be his answer. When I read the verse, I knew God had spoken, and I sent her home. She wasn't very happy. She tried to take off her blouse. I think I saw a slight smile on my father's face. He nodded his head. He started to leave, then he turned back and said, "What was the verse?" Leviticus chapter 18, verse 17. He did smile. He headed into my mother's direction, and I heard him say as he was getting out of range, "Dear, I think we have to talk." Halfway through the 11th grade, my printing teacher came to me. He said he was impressed with my work in his printing class and asked if I would consider switching my major to printing. I said yes, but that I didn't think printing was offered as a major. He said it wasn't, but he had talked to the principal about me and got permission to offer the major to me. Great, I said. I'd like that. He said he wanted me to take over the production of the school newspaper starting next year. Oh, by the way, would you be interested in a printing job part-time at a local printer's? You could make a few bucks and the experience would be invaluable. I was nearly speechless. I started shaking my head yes, and then finally got the word out. I interviewed and started working at the printing company the following week. I was making $1 per hour. Minimum wage in those days was 75 cents per hour. I was in the big time. I was dating a girl by then, nothing serious yet, and no sex. I had learned my lesson, but I think I knew I couldn't hold out forever. Eventually, temptation might win. I asked God every once in a while to help me with my hormones. While I was at it, I asked him to find me the right girl for the rest of my life. I was but 17 when I graduated high school. I started working full-time in the printing company. I worked for them for another year. Toward the end of that year, I happened to be driving past my old high school when this girl, with long, beautiful hair, cut me off while driving her Studebaker car. I had a friend with me at the time. I slowed down and let her have her way. Then I said to my friend, "Wow, did you see that girl? Man, I'd marry her in an instant if she would have me." He laughed and looked over at me and said, "You don't know who that is, do you?" "No," I said, "I've never seen her before in my life." He laughed. "That's Jody Hill, you big dummy." "No," I said, "not that spindly-legged little brat. That is my friend Reggie's cousin." "Oh, that's her." "She grew up," he announced with a big grin. "You can forget her, my friend. I live 2 doors from her, and the kind of guys she hangs with are way out of your league." I dropped him off and went home. When I walked into the house, I saw my mother in the living room. As I passed her, I simply announced, "I just saw the girl I would marry if I could." My mother just sat there and watched me go out of sight. I went into my room, just a quick prayer. "Father, I really like her." 6 months later, we were going steady. 3 years later, we were married. But I'm getting ahead of my story. Oh yes, we were both virgins on our wedding night. After a year working full-time for the printing company, I became restless. I knew that someday I would probably marry Joanne. I never called her Jody. I was still making $1 per hour, and that was a little light for starting a family together with a girl. I asked God what else He had in mind for me. Of course, I didn't hear an answer right away. But one of the young pressmen at the printing company came to me and asked me if I would be interested in going back to school to specialize in typesetting using a Linotype machine. I had seen them in operation. They were amazing. I told him I'd be interested. 3 months later, we found ourselves enrolled in the Franklin Linotype School. I graduated this school just after I turned 19. I arrived home just before Christmas. I knew my next step was to find a job. God, you know that I don't want to leave my hometown and Joanne. Please help me get a job with the local newspaper here. Just after the New Year's celebration, I gathered up my nerve and I went to the local newspaper to apply for a job. Tell me, son, have you been through the International Typographics Union's apprenticeship program? The interviewer asked. No. So you aren't an ITU member? No. I had never heard of the International Typographical Union, let alone some apprenticeship program. Look, son, there's no way you can work at a major newspaper unless you are a member of the union, and you cannot become a member of the union unless you go through their 6-year training program and become a journeyman printer. Furthermore, you would only be able to get into that program if you were essentially a straight A student in school. The program is open only to top young men that simply can't afford to go to college. You might find work in some of the smaller non-union newspapers in small towns. I went home with a heavy heart. I asked God what I was to do now. No answer. I asked my parents. My mother told me to go find a job anywhere I could find it. God would work things out. I took a map and I marked every town that had a small weekly newspaper within 100 miles of my hometown. The following Monday I got into my car and I drove to each town and asked for a job setting type on their linotype. When I got back home, only one newspaper offered to hire me, but they didn't need a linotype operator. I could work on the floor doing what I was doing before I went to linotype school. My mother asked me what I was going to do. I said I guessed I'd take the job offer. It was about an hour's drive from my hometown. I called him and told him that I could start the following Monday. I had to go ahead of time to find a rooming house for my lodging. On Sunday night I said goodbye to my parents and to Joanne and headed for Franklin, Ohio. I was as low as a snake's belly. I would work for the Franklin Chronicle for about 6 months. They had 2 linotype operators. One was an older gentleman that had been there for most of his working life, and the other was a deaf mute who no one liked. They made fun of him and called him the dummy. I didn't like that, and I did my best to befriend him. We could communicate only using a notepad. One day during my lunch break, he came over and told me that he was being fired. And I asked why. And he said that they didn't want to lose me, and they knew I wouldn't stay if I didn't finally get to work on the linotype. So he was being terminated because he had no other skills in printing. This did not set well with me. I could not take his job even if it was the opportunity I was looking for. I went to the owner and I tendered my resignation with a 2-week notice. He told me he planned to put me on the linotype. I told him I appreciated it, but I was just too homesick to stay. I am homesick, Father. Please forgive me if you count what I said as a lie. Oh, by the way, I am unemployed. Can you help me out there? When I got home, my mother handed me a note with a phone number on it. She said that a lady from the Oxford Press in Oxford, Ohio, had called just that afternoon and wanted to talk to me. She said the lady wanted to know if I was still interested in a linotype job. She said I could call that evening. The Oxford Press was the last place I expected to hear from. It was a weekly newspaper, but it produced newspapers for neighboring towns as well as the Miami University bi-weekly and practically all the communities around. They were practically a daily with some of the best and newest linotypes. I started work on Monday. I worked there for 5 years and became the head operator and machinist. 2 years later, Joanne and I were married. 2 years after that, our son, Stephen, was born. We were doing very well. Joanne stayed at home to care for the baby, and I was the breadwinner. I wasn't doing too badly. Our income already exceeded our parents' income. By the time I was 23, I began to get that restless feeling. I was in a top position with this job and felt I had nowhere to advance. My despondency got worse each day. I often found myself eating my lunch in my car. I just wanted to get away from the newspaper environment and my colleagues. To make me even more despondent, a man of about 40 years of age would walk by my car each day carrying a lunch bucket. I began to fantasize that that would be me when I was 40. One day, while eating my lunch in my car, the man walked by, and I became so distraught that I wanted to cry. I thought about starting the car and running away. After I began recovering from my pity party, I realized that I couldn't go on feeling this way. So finally, I asked God to help me. Father, I don't know what's wrong with me. I know you made the opportunity for me to get this job in the first place. I don't want to be ungrateful. Please help me. By the time the prayer was over, I had tears streaming down my face. I just sat there for several minutes. Suddenly, I knew something. It just came into my head. It was as clear as if I had actually heard spoken words. You will not be stuck here forever. Be patient. Long before you are anywhere near 40 years old, you will have plenty of opportunities to advance. Just don't throw them away. I couldn't believe how my attitude had changed. In an instant, I went from crying to smiling. I even wanted to get back to work. I couldn't wait for those opportunities to come. All I needed to do was go about my daily routine with a song in my heart and wait on God to show me the way. I was happy to work cheerfully as long as I didn't feel I was stuck where I was at. Now, I had no doubt that I had just heard from God. It was clear, and I was happy. A couple weeks later, I was asked to go to the newspaper's sister printing shop to repair their linotype. While I was there, the linotype operator asked me why I didn't join the International Typographical Union. I said I was told you couldn't get in unless you had gone through their 6-year apprenticeship program. He told me that that was not exactly true. If you can prove that you have worked at the trade for at least 6 years, they have to let you take their entrance exam. If you pass, they're supposed to let you in. Really? I questioned. Yes, however, the test is quite tough. It is taken from a 4-year Bachelor of Science degree from the University of South Dakota. I doubt you could pass the test without studying the course. It is everything from American history to math to spelling, he said. What has all of that got to do with printing? I asked. Not much, but if you went through their apprenticeship program, you would have studied this entire course the same as if you had enrolled in the University of South Dakota. The union wants you to be the equivalent of a college graduate. He went on to say, one night I thought I would try studying the course, but after a while I gave up. I have all the textbooks, about 24 of them. If a person could study and test out, they could become a journeyman printer. They would make 5 times the amount of money we make now. You would never have to beg for a job. All the major printing companies and newspapers are begging for journeyman printers. You could work anywhere in the United States you might want. During the week, I could not get the idea out of my head of being a journeyman printer. At last I realized that this was one of the opportunities God told me not to pass up. I went back and visited the linotype operator at our sister printing company, and I asked if I could borrow the textbooks. He said I could. I started studying every moment. Joanne gave me spelling words every night. I finished the 4-year course in 1 year. At the end of the time, I got up the nerve to try for the entrance exam. The nearest ITU local was in Dayton, Ohio. I called their office and told them that I wanted to try the test. They didn't sound very friendly, but they said they would send me the forms to fill out. After they did an investigation, if I passed, they would give me a date for testing. After about 2 months, they called me and gave me the testing date. I arrived on time and was very nervous. I took the test and was informed that I would get the results within a week. The following week, I got a phone call telling me I had passed. Now I must appear at the next scheduled union meeting to be voted and sworn in. He warned me that I would not be allowed to work at the trade in any non-union printing shop from that moment on. That included the job I had at the Oxford Press. I gave a 2-week notice to my current boss. Ordinarily, that would be considered adequate, but in this case, finding another linotype operator who could also maintain the machines was going to be difficult. I set out to help them find my replacement. With my help, we found someone. Finally, the day came for the union meeting. I was not allowed in the union hall until after the vote. I was waiting in the hall when the president came out and told me that I had been blackballed. That meant I was voted out, turned down. I said I thought if I passed the test, I was assured to get my journeyman status. He said that was true, but I also had to have a majority of votes from the members. I left with a heavy heart. The next day I returned the textbooks to the printer friend that I had borrowed. I told him what had happened. He said he wasn't surprised. Union members hate letting people in that have not gone through the 6-year apprenticeship program like they had to. They are a proud bunch, and they don't want the industry to get overpopulated with journeyman printers. You can always go back and retest every 2 months at a different city until you find a more friendly chapel of members. Yeah, I said, and in the meantime, my family and I starved to death for lack of a paycheck. I left the sister print shop and stopped by the Oxford Press. I found the owner and told him what had happened. I told him I would like to come back, but I didn't want to knock the new linotype operator out of his job. My ex-boss made me a proposition. If I would promise to stay at least 1 year, he would take me back and keep the new guy. I was to teach him everything I knew. I said yes. Afterward, I went home and began studying the Union Handbook. It clearly stated that if a qualified person could pass the entrance exam, then he would be admitted. The vote by the members was a formality, and it was their duty to vote yes. So, I wrote a long letter to the international headquarters of the Union. I didn't expect much, but in about 2 weeks I got a call from the president of the Dayton Chapel. He was furious. He even called me some names I won't repeat. He said I was way out of line bringing the international headquarters into this situation. Now, he said, get your butt in here Monday morning to retest. We are waiving the 60-day wait period. I said, sorry, sir. I am now committed to something else. What? He explained. What will I tell the International? Beats me, I said, and I hung up. Now, don't get me wrong, I really wanted to say yes, but I had promised to stay at the Oxford Press for a year. I knew God would not let this opportunity slip through my fingers if it was what He intended for me. I also knew if I went back on promises, I would begin to limit what God could do for me. 1 year later, I called the Union office at Dayton. I asked to speak to the president. Hello, I don't know if you remember me, but my name is David Edsel. I took the entrance exam last year and passed, but was blackballed. He said, in a sarcastic tone, oh, I remember you all right. I arrived in Dayton the following week to retest. When I walked into the president's office, he introduced me to 3 gentlemen. They said it would be their job to recommend me to the members and remind them of their duty and see that I was not blackballed again. Great, I said. You must be assuming I'm going to pass the test again this time. No, we are not, he said. You are not going to be given the test again. We decided, since your score was among the highest ever, to let that test stand. I worked at the Dayton Daily News for a short time. The pay was more money than I could imagine. However, the work was as boring as the work at the Oxford Press. I decided to go to work at a company called Dayton Typographic Service, DTS for short. This would be a real challenge. The kind of typesetting they did there was the most difficult and challenging anywhere. A lot of the work there was done for other printers who farmed jobs out to DTS that were above their ability to produce. I worked at DTS from 1963 to the beginning of 1969. For the first couple of years at DTS, I was really challenged. Soon, I was proficient at every kind of typesetting they offered. It was the summer of '68, and I was finishing up a third shift night when a coworker asked me if I would ride with him to see a small shopping guide publication in the Dayton bedroom community of Waynesville, Ohio. The publication was for sale, and he was interested in buying it. I told him that I was tired and I would rather go home. Besides, I had no interest in buying anything that had anything to do with printing anyway. He was persistent. I finally agreed to keep him company. When we arrived at the Valley Shopper facility, there was a note on the door that said, "Out selling advertising. Be back soon." It was a small town, so my friend decided to walk around to see if he could find the owner. I said I thought I'd just get some coffee somewhere and wait for him. I spotted a small ice cream shop across the street and told my friend I'd be there when he was ready to take me back to my car in Dayton. I entered the ice cream parlor and went to the counter to buy a cup of coffee. I found a seat in the back of the parlor. After I drank that cup, I ordered another. I sat there a while longer, wondering what was taking my friends so long. I hated being there. I wanted to go home and go to bed. I must have been out of my mind to come here with him. I hated this place. 5 minutes later, I picked up my half-drank cup of coffee and walked to the front door in hopes to see my coworker. I looked left, nothing. I looked right. Suddenly, I felt something come over me. Something was being poked into my head again. It was as though I was seeing this town completely different from when I first arrived. I was standing there with a cup of coffee in my hand, falling in love with the town of Waynesville. Strange. I finished my coffee and left the ice cream parlor. I walked toward the shopping guide's office. Before I got there, I met my coworker. On the ride back to Dayton, he told me how much the man wanted for the business. He said he could not raise that much and wondered if I wanted to go in with him as an equal partner. I told him no immediately. I wasn't thinking about buying the business anyway. I was making a lot of money at DTS. I also knew that this coworker was not above stealing a few simple items from DTS. Nothing major. But stealing is stealing. I knew God would not want me involved with someone like that, especially as a partner. After I arrived back home and told Joanne where I'd been, I went to bed. Just before I fell asleep, my mind returned to the town of Waynesville. I simply couldn't understand what had come over me. During the next 3 or 4 weeks, all I could think about was this little town of Waynesville. I talked so much about it that Joanne wanted to know if I wanted to move there. I felt it was too far to commute to DTS each day. The only way we could live there is if I bought the shopping guide. The question was, if I bought it, could I build it up to at least the kind of money I was making now? In passing, one day, I asked my coworker if he was going to buy the shopping guide. He told me he could not find a partner and had given the idea up. That night, I told Joanne that I had no obligation to the co-worker anymore. If we were to decide to buy the shopping guide, it was at least available. We had the money to buy it, but I would be giving up a good-paying job, and we would have to live on a lot less. I had no guarantee that I could build this business into better take-home pay than what we had now. And I was sure I could not afford to hire anyone to help me. I knew I could not build the business and do all the work by myself. I would need someone who was stupid enough to work for practically nothing, like I was going to have to. I will not do this unless you are 100% in favor of it. I want to make sure you realize how hard this will be, I said to Joanne. Let me say something, she answered back. You have done nothing but talk about this for weeks. God has to have put this into you. I don't think we really have a choice. Let's test it a little. My cousin Reggie, also your best friend, is working at the Connersville News-Examiner. He has a little money, as you know. Why don't we visit him and tell him about Waynesville and the shopping guide and see what he says? If God is moving you and he moves Reggie, then I'd say it's a pretty good sign. We paid Reggie and his wife Jean a visit that Friday night. I mentioned nothing about Waynesville or the real purpose of our visit. During the lull in our conversation, I took the sale bill from my pocket that was advertising the Valley Shopper for sale. I simply laid it on the table in front of him. "What's this?" he asked. "Oh, something I ran across," I said. He took a few minutes to read down through the listing. It listed all the equipment and the business statistics. Then Reggie looked up. "Are you going to buy this?" he asked. "I think I want to, but I'm pretty sure I'd have a hard time growing it alone," I answered. "Are you asking me if I'd like to go in with you?" "I'm wondering if you would consider it," I said. He then replied without hesitation, "Why don't you and Joanne spend the night here, and Jean and I will follow you to Waynesville tomorrow and take a look." 2 weeks later, Reggie and I became the new owners of the Valley Shopper. We would take possession December 1st, 1968. The 1st of November, word came that the previous owner, Dale, had a heart attack and was in the hospital. There was no one to get the paper out that week. I dropped everything and ran to Waynesville. Dale had given me a key just a few days earlier so I could come in and get acquainted with his equipment. Without permission, I let myself in. How could I create, typeset, and print that week's issue without any knowledge of his equipment, or who he had sold advertising to that week, or where the copy for the ads might be? "Help!" I cried when I finally got Reggie on the phone. "Bad news. Dale had a heart attack last night and he's in the hospital in Dayton. Don't know if he's going to live. There's no one here to get this issue out on the street. The word is out that he has sold this thing to us. If we miss publishing this week, everyone will think it is our fault. We'll be starting out on the wrong foot." All I heard was, "I'm coming. I'll be there as soon as I can." The phone went dead. Reggie was there in 3 hours. Somehow, we got that week's issue out, and all the issues the rest of the month of November. Dale recovered physically, but he was in bad shape financially, as he had counted on the November proceeds from the Valley Shopper. Reggie and I had not expected to get proceeds anyway until December, so we let Dale keep the November proceeds, and we did November's work free of charge. Just to show how good deeds return good deeds, about 3 months later, our cash flow was in jeopardy. I had run out of newsprint and had no paper to print that week's issue on. Wednesday morning, press day, Reggie and I looked at each other, and one of us said, "Well, it's been great, so far as it lasted." The words were hardly in the air when a box truck pulled up to our loading area. The driver said he had a load of newsprint to deliver. I asked who ordered it. He said, "Let's see, a man named Dale Levan. It's been ordered and paid for." When I saw Dale to thank him, he just smiled and said, "Kind of figured you'd be running out of newsprint by now." The newsprint kept us going a couple more months, but we had grossly miscalculated how much startup money we were going to need. I could see the handwriting on the wall. Sooner or later, we were going down. I was praying to God to let us last at least until spring. I loved Waynesville, and I just wanted to walk down the main street sidewalk with my shoulders back, doing my best to look successful. God granted me that prayer and gave me a little more. Before the end of spring, we had got a major printing job. We were to do all the typesetting, composing, and printing for a new publication just starting in Dayton. Based on the strength of this new job, we bought new typesetting equipment. We even started some weekly publications in other towns. We knew we had to get a lot of our eggs out of the one basket. We were still depending a lot on the publication from Dayton. We didn't have a contract. So we decided to start a new publication in a major city. We picked Indianapolis. I had a friend there, Tom, who was willing to partner with us to start this publication. We were about 2 months into the Indy publication when we lost the Dayton account. We were pretty strapped for money because we were financing the new Indy publication, and it was called The Trader. That afternoon, we locked our front door. We thought for the last time. I would call the Indianapolis partner tomorrow and tell him we were out of business. It was with a heavy heart that Reggie and I walked away from something we loved. The shame of it all was that it looked like The Trader might be a success if given enough time. I was very quiet at dinner. Afterwards, I tried to watch TV, but I was too restless. Finally, I got up and went back to the shopping guide office. I walked in and looked around. I was really feeling sorry for myself. I went into my own office and I sat down at my desk. I dreaded calling the Indianapolis partner tomorrow. Oh God, I want to thank you for my time here in Waynesville. I know that it was because of you that we have lasted this long. I know this is the end. I have no right to ask for more, but well, I'm afraid. I've lost my journeyman status. What am I going to do? Please help me. I sat there almost crying for several minutes. Suddenly, like that time in my automobile when the guy with the lunch bucket came by and depressed me, something was being realized inside my head. My feeling of despair started disappearing. Like a light just turned on, the thought struck me that I should be ashamed of myself for not knowing God was still in control. I seemed to think, go home. Get a good night's sleep. It's going to be okay. Just trust. I became calm, relieved. My worries were completely gone. As I stood up, a smile came across my face. I went home. I got ready for bed. Joanne asked, "Are you okay?" "Oh, yes," I said. And I slept like a baby. The next morning, I arrived at the office first. I was sitting at my desk when Reggie came in. He looked almost gray. "Oh, David, the goblins are roosting on our roof," he said with the sadness and worry that I had experienced last night. "Sit down. I want to tell you something that happened to me last night," I said. I told him of my experience. I have no idea how it is possible, but I am sure God told me to just keep on keeping on and it would be all right. The strain on Reggie's face immediately disappeared. "Oh, good," he said. I was amazed that he could accept what I said so completely. But the weight of disaster had gone from both of us. We had no idea how this business could survive, but somehow we knew it would. 2 days later, Joanne asked if I had some money. We needed to go to the grocery. I told her I didn't have any money at all. I didn't know what we were going to do. Later, Reggie asked me to go to lunch with him. He said he only had enough money for us to get each a cup of coffee. We went down to the pizza parlor and sat down at a table with our coffee. "Whatever he's going to do, he better do it quick," Reggie spouted out. "I know, we're out of food at home. I've got bills to pay both at the office as well as my own," I reported. "And I'm hungry." Just then, 2 people got up and left the pizza parlor. There was a half-eaten pizza pie left on their table. Reggie and I looked at each other, and without a word, we moved to that table and had lunch. With our bellies a bit more satisfied, we returned to the office. I sat down at my desk as the phone rang. It was our new partner's wife, Donna, in Indianapolis. My heart jumped because I hadn't told them about our situation. "I just called to ask you what you wanted us to do with all this money we have over here," I heard Donna say over the phone. I was confused. "What money?" I asked. "This business has caught on fire over here. People are going crazy for the trader. Tom and I just thought we should pay down some of the money this company owes to your printing company there," Donna explained. "Oh, good idea. Yes, why don't you send the money special delivery? It'll help with our cash flow," I said calmly. I hung up the phone and just sat there for a few minutes. Then a big smile came across my face, and I said out loud, "Thank you, God." I ran off to find Reggie to tell him what had just happened. The trader grew like wildfire, and in 1973 we sold everything in Waynesville and moved to Indianapolis. We started publications in other cities. We started a printing company specializing in printing newspapers and magazines. We even started a construction company. They were all successful. Reggie and Tom and I had always been Christians, and we were quick to give God the credit. None of us had college degrees. Often it was like the blind leading the blind, but God kept fixing things. Why? Because our door was open. And we all let God walk in at an early age. We all had family before us, praying for us. I retired in 1995. We sold everything to a large publishing company. We were all financially independent. Because we had allowed God into our lives, and because we depended on Him to take care of us, He was able to help us fulfill the destiny He had planned for us even before we were born, even before He created this world. Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5. Before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee. And before thou comest forth out of the womb, I sanctified thee. And in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 4, before the world was created, God had Christ choose us to live with Him and to be His innocent and loving people. I have presented two versions of my life. In chapter 3, I told my story according to what my life might have been, as if I hadn't accepted Christ, if I hadn't had my bottle washed clean at an early age. In chapter 4, I told the real true story. That was my life made possible because I accepted Christ at such an early age, thanks to my parents and grandparents and great-grandparents. You too can have God wash your bottle clean. Even without ancestors' prayers, you can start with God at any time. He will work in you and will begin immediately. He will bless you for the rest of your days, then bring you home to heaven. You will start affecting the lives of your children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and on and on. Chapter 5. First, let's get saved. To be continued at the beginning of next week. God bless you, my friends.